One of the most famous names in the history of weather forecasting in this state was an Englishman named Clement Wragge. He was responsible for the idea of shooting guns into the clouds to try to make it rain around the time of Federation. Not one of his best schemes, but even at that time he understood the importance of ocean currents. His best-known international project was an observatory on top of Ben Nevis in Scotland, and he was rewarded with a gold medal from the Scottish Meteorological Society for that work. His career in the state did not have such a happy ending because, as Jenny Woodward found, Mr Wragge, although brilliant, was a difficult character.
In the late 1800s, the colony of Queensland advertised for a chief weather forecaster. Clement Wragge secured the position and quickly set about establishing an observatory.
He set up the official one on Wickham Terrace. Almost, if you were looking today, you'd almost think of it as being in the grounds of the windmill. It was that part of Wickham Terrace. But he also built a house very shortly after he came to Queensland in Swan Road, Taringa, which was called Capemba. And from about 1890, you're also seeing in the newspapers observations from the Capemba Observatory. And that went on right until he lost his job and his official observatory was closed down in the early years after Federation.
While he had some groundbreaking ideas, it was his inclement temper that often got him into trouble.
He was the first person to name tropical cyclones, to give them a name. And he started in a correct way using classical Greek and Roman names, but then moved on to politicians that he didn't like. So I think he possibly wasn't as diplomatic as maybe he should have been as a public servant as he was initially in Queensland. When he went to Italy, he was very impressed with this Steiger vortex gun that the Italians were using to shoot at hail clouds or clouds where there would be hailstones to break up the storm. And he got the idea that maybe they could be used in Queensland to shoot at the clouds to make it rain in times of drought.
However, the main experiment was in Charleville in 1902, where locals had raised thousands of pounds to purchase the guns and hold a test.
And the first experiment, a few raindrops actually fell and there was a shower later that afternoon, so people were very hopeful that it worked. But unfortunately, the next experiment, some of the guns blew up but the clouds didn't, so they were then considered to be unsuccessful.
Wragge's reputation was seriously tarnished by the failures, but he was undaunted. He published his own newsletters and went on lecture tours.
We've got a lovely series from 1903, and I think this is another important thing he did. It's like some of the medical scientists now are explaining in words that we can all understand the importance of the work they're doing.
Despite his obvious passion for the science and his hard work, Wragge missed out on the plum job he coveted most of all, the director of the new Commonwealth Weather Bureau. Instead, it went to Henry Hunt, who established the new bureau in Melbourne.
The numbers are the power in politics, as we all know, and New South Wales and Victoria were much more powerful than Queensland in the sheer numbers game. And one of the things he had done that had upset the other meteorologists so much was that he had headed his stationery and used the term Chief Weather Bureau, an Australasian Meteorological Bureau. This was well before Federation, as though the other states or the other colonies' weather stations didn't exist and their meteorologists were of no account.
When the Queensland Weather Bureau was closed, the family fell on difficult times.
To the Right Honourable the Premier. Dear Sir, I beg you to pardon the liberty I'm taking in addressing you, but my great needs impel me to do so. The closing of the Weather Bureau has deprived my husband, Mr. Clement Wragge, of his means of livelihood, and I am informed that all he has to maintain his large family is what he makes by his lectures. Your humble servant, Leonora Wragge.
These days, Wragge would be described as a self-promoter and empire builder, but there's no doubt he was a great innovator and forward thinker.
He did have the idea that it'd be good to track the weather through Cyclone Alley from the islands down through New Caledonia and those sorts of parts past Willis Island and Whoomp into Queensland. And he did recognise too that the weather events that were likely to cause the most damage to southern Queensland were the ones that crossed the coast between Rockhampton and about Maryborough and then got lodged in the mountains as rain depressions. He certainly recognised that quite early on.
After tracking his life, Wragge has become a bit of a hero to Helen Gregory.
Quite often it's the innovators, the people who are willing to take risks, that the rest are the people who just sit back and just wish things would happen, have the least tolerance for. And I think he suffered a little bit from that phenomenon. He probably didn't help himself by being a bit cranky and doing some unusual things like running a private observatory when he was also had a government one. But I think he probably deserves much more serious scholarship.
Jenny Woodward reporting there. And the history of Clement Wragge's intriguing life is held at the State Library.